Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Scrum Pulse session of Ask a Professional Scrum Trainer about scaling Scrum with Nexus. We have a great panel today. If I was at a conference, I would get myself out of the corner and attend this panel. These are some really very experienced PSTs with scaling and with Nexus. So we only have 1 hour today, so I'm just gonna get us started. Your microphones will be muted throughout. This session is recorded, so it's an Ask a PST. Feel free to start getting your questions into the Q&A, and I'll be moderating them and trying to direct them to the different PSTs as necessary. Who is Scrum.org? Here we are. So we're Scrum.org, focused on training, education, and community, founded by Ken Schwaber. And just like we have today, we're a consistent global community with people from all around the world. And my name is Patricia Kong. I work for Scrum.org, one of the co-developers of the Nexus framework. And today we have Ms. Magda Furlit. I think Magda's based in Poland. I've asked each person for a sentence about themselves. So Magda is a PST and an experienced agile transformation consultant at magdafurlit.com. She's the founder and CEO of the company Agile in the Spotlight. So that's Magda. And then we have Simon Flossman, who is wearing this navy polo shirt. Simon's a PST. He works for the company Colnet, and he is a co-steward for the Scaled Professional Scrum with Nexus class. What that means is that he works with the community to improve the scaling courseware that we have. Next, we have Ravi Verma with the mustache. Ravi is also a Scrum.org professional trainer. He's the founder of Smooth Apps and the Al Dente product, which really focused on data and metrics. So that's an interesting thing. He's learned SAFe from Dean Leffingwell, LESS from Craig Larman, Nexus from Ken Schwaber, and he has worked with organizations from a variety of scale in terms of agility, from 5 teams to 350 plus teams. So that's a lot. Yuval Yuret, wearing the glasses and black hoodie. He's also a PSC. He's the co-creator of the Kanban guide for Scrum teams. So that's available on Scrum.org, and the PSK, Professional Scrum with Kanban class. He's a SAFe fellow and an SPCT. So he's going to be able to bring that to the conversation. And he focuses on helping organizations achieve agility at scale. So he is a very pragmatic and Israeli style assertive type of gentleman. So that is our panel today. And just a quick reminder, in case you might think that Nexus is something else, which it is, it's many different things. Today, we're talking about how we can scale Scrum with Nexus. So Nexus is a framework that is based off of Scrum. It works on one product. It helps multiple teams work together to maximize the value that an organization and customers can work off of a single product or initiative. One thing to mention is that it has a single product owner, single product backlog, and that's what multiple teams are pulling from to deliver value. So I'm going to stop sharing screens. You have the emails there, and we'll have these on our site, so you can contact the trainers after all. But I'd like to encourage people to start getting their questions into the Q&A just to ask, and not into the chat, because I won't be tracking those. So one of the first questions that we might be able to start off with, Ravi, is when you're thinking about starting an organization that's thinking about starting to scale, and they're looking at the different frameworks, and the ones that are out there are like Nexus, LESS, and SAFe. Briefly, what are some things that they'd want to be thinking about, and where could they go to learn more, whether that be resources or internally in their organization?
Yeah, great question, Trish. And I was actually hired by a company that has about more than 500 teams, and they asked me to evaluate the 3 frameworks, LESS, Nexus, and SAFe, and make some recommendations. And here's my biggest takeaway. I would recommend a structured approach to making a decision that honors your unique context, your unique values, and your unique outcomes. So my advice is, number one, be crystal clear about articulating the business outcomes you are trying to achieve as a result of scaling. That's point number one. I would say point number two is be crystal clear about your guiding principles, your non-negotiables, because every company may have a specific culture, and we want to honor that culture of the company. And they may have some guiding principles that are very near and dear to their, to their culture. So I would recommend not bringing in a framework that violates or clashes with your non-negotiable principles. So step two, be crystal clear about your principles. So for example, self-organization, empiricism, and you may have others. And you, maybe self-organization or self-management and empiricism is not one of your non-negotiables, or you don't agree with it. It's okay. Whatever it is, be transparent. So that's step two. Step three is values. A value is something which, when it is stomped on, it creates a visceral reaction in your body. So be crystal clear about your non-negotiable values. And I would say start with those. And then if you happen to have any organization or constraints, and then create a decision-making framework. And then what you can do is you can create maybe like an Excel table or a list, and you say, okay, here are the 10 things that really matter to us: outcomes, principles, values, any other constraints. And now you can put a column for each scaling framework. It will be flawed, but you do a subjective rating. And ultimately, all tools are, imperfect. So use that conversation as a way to arrive at your answer. And I've written a blog on this topic. I'm not calling your baby ugly, 25 ways to compare scaling frameworks. It's a very it can be an emotional discussion. I'm trying to take the emotion out of it and honor all frameworks, honor your company, and help you find a way that might honor you. So those are my opening thoughts.
Thanks. Yeah. And I know you spent a lot of time working and doing that research for that Not Calling Your Baby Ugly blog. So maybe this is a good way to segue into this, Yuval, since you have your hand raised. There are several questions that people, when they were talking about what they would be interested in learning, is just for a quick differentiation of the Nexus framework versus SAFe. And for me, that's not always really comparing apples to apples. It's not comparing the same thing. So can you just add your comments to maybe what Ravi said, and then just, maybe really some quick pointers about whether you want to do advantages and disadvantages or similarities, differences of Nexus and SAFe?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So to build on everything Ravi said, the one thing I would, almost seems obvious at this point, I'm guessing, that's why we didn't call it out so far, is learn about these different frameworks. Don't make too many assumptions about them. There's a lot of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt going out around the world. People are throwing mud at SAFe. People are saying things about Nexus, about less. Less is very hard for people to go into unless they're really willing to shake up the tree. SAFe is too prescriptive, not agile, a way for the rough people to stay in business. I'm exaggerating, but not that much. Nexus requires you to really be serious about your Scrum and doesn't scale that much, or nobody, is really using it. Those are the kind of things you might hear in the market if you go out and talk. I think anybody, regardless of their choice, whether they actually go and use less, SAFe, or Nexus, would actually do well by learning a lot about each one of these frameworks. Whether you go and learn directly from, Ken, Craig Larman, or Dean Leffingwell, or from others, that's up to you. It's definitely a good idea to try to go to the source, but try to learn about these different approaches would be my recommendation. To your question around what are the key differences if people are looking at Nexus versus SAFe, for example, Nexus, it's a much lighter weight framework, really takes the core of Scrum and puts the minimally viable additional structure on top of it, whether it's events, artifacts, and accountabilities, to allow you to scale to a couple of teams that are working on one product together. That's the main, thing that Nexus provides. It can, go to a larger scale, but most people, when they talk about Nexus, that's what they're trying to do. If you look at SAFe, SAFe has a couple of different aspects to it. One is SAFe meets an organization, is more useful for meeting an organization where it is, I would say. It's less of a revolution to implement SAFe in an organization. Even the name kind of reflects that. But it also might be less powerful initially to implement SAFe in an organization because you're acquiescing to a lot of the ways that things are currently done. You're willing to live with a lot of compromise. You're pragmatic almost maybe to a fault when you're implementing SAFe. It's sort of those conversations that we had in the community years ago about Kanban is evolutionary, Scrum is revolutionary, and people, need to make a choice. I see SAFe as closer to Kanban in that sense. It's more evolutionary. If you stick to it and use the principles and think well about how to organize your teams and teams of teams, arts, whatever you want to call it in SAFe, you will reach your goals. If you just use it as lipstick on a pig, you're not going to get anywhere.
Thank you for that. Speaking about goals, actually, one of the things that we were thinking about when I was talking, when Ken Schreiber and I were talking about Nexus and the development of it, was that everybody was coming and talking about scaling, and yet we couldn't even figure out if it was effective, if it was valuable. When you're scaling, how would we start to measure that value? So Magda, I am wondering, with your experience in scaling and using Nexus, and obviously frameworks like evidence-based management, where we're trying to use empiricism, measure value against goals, what has been your experience with that? And especially with Nexus, when you're looking at, what do you measure? How would you know when you should be scaling or not scaling? I think that's really important because each team is the price of a car. So how do you know and balance that cost?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for this question. It's so important to understand it. If we have two teams, the question is if we should scale, just measure value and just deliver it. If we need a process, maybe simple Scrum will be enough. But when we are growing and growing and growing, and we have really many people, like for example, 60, 70, even 80 people on the board, and the question is if they are value oriented, product oriented. Most of organizations, they are working only on outputs, so effects, results of their work, number of features, for example, and they are measuring, deliver me more, give me more features each sprint. But what about value delivered and how to organize it? So from my experience, those really cross-functional teams that are really working on the same product and delivering one integrated increment, because it's always also the question. And this increment that is really valuable, usable, and useful refers to outcomes. So measurable changes in customer behavior. And also, of course, sometimes somehow related to the company impact. So to the revenue and to, for example, market share also. So that would be the thing I would recommend people. So look at value. Value means measurable change in your customer or user, of course, behavior, or of course, measure it and of course, look at those indicators when it comes to organization. And sometimes people, it turned out after initial thoughts and some initial workshops, it turned out very often that we don't have a product because we have a mess in the organization and we don't measure value. So again, we need to think about what is the product. So this is the first thing. How many people do we need there? And how can we organize them around goals, around the product goal, around the product vision, and how we can really measure value. So I really like the comparison and actually combination of using Nexus framework which is quite simple, understandable, not so prescriptive, and evidence-based management at the same time, because they can be really powerful for product delivery and value delivery. So focus on outcomes, focus with teams on product goals, focus on also, of course, business indicators at the same time.
Oh, thank you, Magda. Yeah, and there's so much information about that we have on our website too for people to look into that. Simon, I see your hand up and you wanted to ask something. And there's actually a question that came in that I would love to direct your way also that's a little bit of a tie-in to what Magda was talking about. So we're talking about the whole organization, thinking about, we need to be scaling. And one of the things that we know that is something that can kill scaling is the notion of dependencies. So they're talking about, we're talking about measuring and scaling. What do you do? So Nexus is 3 to 9 teams. We suggested, whatever works. What would you suggest for the person who asked? They said that, what would you recommend to someone who has 2 teams that are always dependent on each other to help them manage their work? What do we think about when people start to think about scaling there?
Okay, interesting question. So maybe I would like to add a small remark to Magda's brilliant answer. So what I'm seeing quite often that the discussion about outcomes and value, before we need to talk about that, it's important, but oftentimes we see that a single Scrum team is not able to deliver a done increment on their own. So it's a way for them to get to that stage to actually being able to build something which is potentially releasable. And here the big warning is, do not start scaling at that phase. So it won't get any better. So if you have a team, let's say with 9 to 10 people, and they have difficulty to work together, they maybe are having sub-teams with testers and developers and these kind of things. And at the end of the sprint, they're having a hard time to bring in everything together. If you would scale now, it will not get even better if you have 2 or 3 teams. So this function will scale as well. So be very careful here. So the first step is being able to create done increments, being able to validate if you actually can deliver value or what is value in your situation. If this is met, then start scaling. And thank you for that interesting question with 2 teams. So I guess 2 teams are a little on the border. So I'm not seeing that you immediately need to add so much to it. I guess a first step would be, if you have dependency between those teams, make those dependency transparent. So that would be a first recommendation. In the Nexus framework, we call this cross-team refinement, but maybe it's a little bit too much here. So start with making those things transparent. So one way is to have a visualization about it. You could have a couple of dependencies here. You could have dependencies between the work, like between PBIs. You could have a dependency between those 2 teams. Maybe some team has a person with a certain skill set which the other team needs, and these kind of things. Or you also could have dependencies between or in the architecture and the infrastructure. So try to make that transparent. That's the first step to enable empiricism, that you can start thinking about ways to remove it. There are a couple of ways depending on this type of dependencies. For instance, if we have the dependencies in work, then we could think to slice the work in a different way. That could be one approach here.
So those are good recommendations. I'm just going to stay with you, Simon, for a second. And then I do have a question for you, Ravi, also. I think this will be pertinent for you. So there's a question in here where a community member is saying they've been introducing less as a starting point for scaling Scrum. And then if needed, they're going to slowly introduce with the Nexus integration team as needed. So the Nexus integration team is an accountability or role that is something we created for the Nexus framework. And we've been looking at it. Is it something that is needed, or is it something that should just be a practice? What it does do is lift up bottom-up intelligence. Simon, the question for you is, what do you think about using less or even Nexus without the NIT as a starting point, and then incrementally introducing that? What would be some pros and cons there?
Oh, that's a good question. So if we go back to the example with the two teams, so the first thing would be to start making dependency transparent. And then we are hoping that the team are able to sort things out and get the dependencies eliminated on their own. So if that's not the case, then we need something. And that's basically the idea of the Nexus integration team, to have an accountability. So if nobody takes care of integration or dependency removal, someone should, and that's the Nexus integration team. So I guess this accountability is needed if you work on scale. So what are the cons of having a Nexus integration team? That's a good question. Maybe somebody of my colleagues can help me here.
Let's kick that to Ravi. Do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I feel that these frameworks are interrelated with the organizational maturity. So here's my interpretation. Why did, the creators of Nexus framework introduce the whole concept of a Nexus integration team? When I go into companies that are trying to evolve from single team Scrum to scale Scrum, one of the biggest challenges that I have observed psychologically is the psychological identity of the human being is associated with the Scrum team. So it's natural because we have trained them to graduate from individual identity to a Scrum team identity. And so people have now, in healthy Scrum, professional Scrum, they have started being laser focused at their Scrum team goal. And the challenge is now when we ask them to create a maybe superordinate goal, which is to say, let's sacrifice the team goal for the greater goal, which is the Nexus goal. It's just that human nature intervenes. And sometimes there's a lack of a desire to say, wait a minute, no, my Scrum team is the best. We have the best DoD. We have the best coding convention. We have the best working agreement. Those other people, they're nitwits. Why, I want to take care of my feature, my product area, right? So sometimes it's a lack of desire which gets in the way of multiple Scrum teams collaborating and aligning towards a greater Nexus goal. And sometimes it's not that there is a lack of desire or a willingness, it's a lack of ability. We may need superior skills and practices to be successful at a scaled Scrum level. And so we may not have used those muscles for a while. And this is where I think the genius of the Nexus integration team comes in, where I feel that the Nexus framework anticipates that when we are trying to play the game at a higher level, you will require higher order skills, which you may not yet have. And so that's why Nexus anticipates and gives you a technique to say, well, find out what's the biggest thing that's getting in the way of delivering a valuable, shippable, integrated increment. Find out who are the people who may have the skills necessary to address that gap and make it their job to teach people how to fish and eliminate that. But the problem will shift. So as you mature on your path to scaling Scrum, what may be a problem at one stage of your journey may not be a problem at the next. So that's what I love about the genius of the Nexus integration team. The accountability is clear. And as the impediment moves up and down the supply chain, it allows the team to use bottom-up intelligence to crowdsource. Who are the best people who can help us overcome this? They go in, form the net, teach people how to fish, and they dissolve. And maybe the next team goes, next set of people come in. And perhaps there is a day in time when the maturity of the organization has reached such a level where you no longer need the net. And if that's the case, I wonder, maybe Nexus is not the framework. And maybe you go to a yet lighter weight framework. And, I was talking to some of my Nexus SPS students yesterday, and I was saying, maybe one day the framework is the Nike framework. Just do it. That's all you need. Your maturity is so high, just do it. You need 3 words. So frameworks may be a path or maybe necessary tool for part of your journey, and you may outgrow your framework. That doesn't make you a bad company. It doesn't make the framework. It just served its purpose. Move on. Choose what's valuable.
Thanks, Ravi. And we are not sponsors of Nike, just letting everyone know that. So I'm going to dive deeper into the Nexus framework, and please, submit questions and answers as you see fit. We did get a bunch before we started, but I have a question that I think is perfect for Yuval because it's it's, software, hardware. Here's the question for everyone else. How should we be thinking about applying agility at scale in an industrial world where the product is a physical one? And that's in your wheelhouse. So what's the best compromise between having a complete cross-functional team set working on different features? And there's all the stuff that could happen there, which could easily mean reaching a huge number of people to cover all the production processes and validations needed. And secondly, having different functional teams working on different project phases, but not the vertical slice in terms of competencies and skills. And let's get that to Yuval first. And if other people have some hardware, software examples, please feel free to jump in.
Thanks, Trish. So yeah, in the last couple of years, I've been working a lot of the time with the consumer product goods company that builds stuff that doesn't have any software in it. The sort of stuff some of us use, most days to take care of ourselves. And when I started to work with this Fortune 50 organization, the big challenge that they were having was actually between the technical and commercial community. They realized that it doesn't make sense to design a technical solution, a technical product, and only then make sure that they can sell it at a certain price and that they can make certain claims about it. So they used Scrum initially to have the technical and commercial communities work hand in hand and create increments every sprint that are holistic. Increment of this is how the product can be. This is what we've learned about its delightfulness for potential customers from actually, having customers try it out, initially see it and then try it out. And this is what we've learned about how to look at it on the shelf and what the first moment of truth when picking it up and looking at it at, your favorite grocery store or retailer would look like, and what the secondary moment of truth would look. In order to have a Nexus sprint review of an integrated increment that has both these technical and commercial aspects so that they can decide, okay, this is something that looks good, we can go ahead with it, or this is something that we don't feel comfortable with yet, let's run another sprint on it. They needed to bring in a lot of different competencies, people that were experts on running test panels, people doing design, people doing customer research or product research, people who are marketing experts, people that are experts at preparing for manufacturing. And there was a big question around, okay, we have a huge program that we want to have in the market by, holiday season 2022 or 2021, they call it 2022, but now it's in the market. 2 years ago, they were already stressed around everything they need to do to bring it to the market. So saying, okay, let's have a small team that works on it, not an option. They had to scale. They had to pull in like 40, 50 people, even during the design phase, to do this sort of work. And we had a big question around how should we create the teams around that. Okay, we want to have a product owner, one product backlog, one Nexus around it, but how do we create the teams? And what we landed on was that we will have teams that are kind of specialized in their own areas, that will be able to collaborate and focus on their own areas. But the Nexus framework, the Nexus events and artifacts would enable us to actually connect these different teams to a holistic proposition frequently enough. From an economical trade-off perspective, it made more sense to do that than to create, one huge team or a couple of huge teams that try to do everything related to commercial and technical on one specific team. Bottom line of this story is you need to look at the product goal you have. You need to look at your product backlog for what you're trying to do. And then design the teams based on that, based on the collaborations that you need to achieve that product goal or to work towards that product goal. If you think every small thing is going to require collaboration between technical and commercial or between these different groups, have them in one team. But if you see, okay, 80% of the collaboration actually can fit into these teams, and we can deal with the interaction between them using the scaling artifacts and events in Nexus or any sort of scaling framework, then maybe that might be a better choice. Don't force the issue. We love stream-aligned teams. We love feature teams. We love to say that the teams are cross-functional, but it should be an economic trade-off decision that is based on your goal. And the one last thing I would say is be empirical about it. Have the opportunity to change things along the way. Try something and be ready to change the team structure. Remember, the Nexus is the unit that you want to self-organize within.
Thank you for that. And just from some of the experiences I've had, when you're working on something that complex, and the complexity in terms of the integration of the people and the things, those events have been really helpful, and the Nexus integration team. I've had people though ask me about Scrum and Nexus, and they're doing very repetitive work. Maybe it's in chemistry, biochemistry, and maybe Scrum and Nexus isn't for them, and they should be coordinating in other ways. So do what works and be empirical, like you've all said. Talking about the goal again, Magda, I think this might be a question that I would love to hear your voice on. So, say we're working using Nexus, we're on a cadence, and in previous sprints, there's been some challenges and there's dependencies, right? So this is a typical project that you faced. What do you do when some of the other teams say, hey, your work isn't contributing to the progress of this project or the goal? What would you suggest as a solution here? How do you start to handle those conflicts?
Yeah, so probably there are many ways how to answer it, how to respond to such an issue, and this is very common, actually, at least from my experience. So I would introduce several things. So the first thing, of course, it's sprint retrospective. So let's talk. If we are working together on the same product goal, why is this happening, right? And the second thing is cross-team product backlog refinement. So we can, at that time, we can see what is upcoming for next sprints, for next 2, maybe 3 sprints, and we can see and we can manage those dependencies, and we can see if we are really contributing to the product goal or some goal delivery, right? Maybe it can refer to the Nexus sprint goal. We can refer here to the product goal, and we can see what we are doing to really contribute to it, and what's happening, why this team is not delivering any value towards, of course, this goal. What would be the reason from it? So of course, digging it up and absolutely those things and react immediately. So I would also say, don't wait till the end of the sprint for the retrospective. Of course, it is a great topic for the retrospective, but I would react immediately. And then as a retrospective, maybe some action points to go deeper into for product cross-team, product backlog refinement, to see what is upcoming, to avoid such a situation in the future. So we like just a quick thoughts about it.
Yeah. Ravi, did you want to add on? Thanks, Magda.
Yeah, I wanted to add a couple of things. So I want to build on what Magda said earlier on about focusing on outcomes. So I was in a company, an airline company, and we introduced Nexus Plus, evidence-based management, and I was not doing a good job as a coach. I was not connecting with them in terms of what measures of business outcome we could use to empirically gauge the efficacy of scaling. So I want to offer a suggestion to everybody on the call in case it helps them. I started looking at the shareholder reports for all the airlines for that company, which was a publicly traded company, and all of their competitors, American Airlines, Alaska, Southwest Airlines, you name it. And I started going through the investor decks, and I started finding some commonalities between the things that different airlines were talking about. And I shared that with the Nexus, the whole Nexus Plus, and I said, look at your investor deck and look at the investor deck of your competitors, and then see if it gives you some ideas about what are the measurable goals for your company as a whole, and how might the work that you are doing inside of your Nexus contribute to at least one of those slides on the investor deck. And then see if now you can create some kind of a scoreboard of leading and lagging indicators in the context of your Nexus that you can tie back to the things that your board of directors is focused on, your C-suite is focused on. And if you do that, now you can take that one level lower. And then when you're doing the Nexus sprint planning, you can ask each of the teams, given that this is the Nexus sprint goal, and here's the measurable impact it tries to make towards the investor deck that we are focusing on for the next quarter, what might each Scrum team do? What might be a sprint goal that each Scrum team can focus on that might enable the Nexus sprint goal, which in turn impacts the investor deck. And I find that the biggest disservice we can do in any scaling framework or even in single team Scrum is to have a feature-centric or a task-centric view of the work and not a customer-centric or a business-centric view of the work. And here's why it's more important at scaling, because what will happen is your budget, you could have like an annual $20 million budget for your Nexus. And it's possible that the problems that you are facing, some of your impediments can only be resolved by the C-suite of the company. And your C-suite will not show up to your sprint review if you're talking about bits and bytes and XML and data schema. They don't care. Investors don't care about bits and bytes and schema. Investors care about ROI. So if you screw up and if you're not able to explain the why to your team members in a way that ties to the why of the investors, the why of the executives will not show up, they will not remove your impediment, and scaling will be an absolute failure. So that's one thing I would recommend. Be crystal clear about the why of the Nexus and the why of your Scrum team. Also, I would say one anti-pattern I've seen which causes the kind of behavior that we were discussing is the psychological identity of the Scrum team could be associated with a component. So let's say I'm a back office team. So we just do billing, customer onboarding, tech support kind of software. All right, great. It just so happens that in this Nexus sprint goal, there's not that much work for billing back office. There's work for, I don't know, something maybe sales or the shopping cart, hypothetically. What I have seen is some teams say, oh, no, we don't touch that. We do billing. So they'll go further in the backlog and they will pull some item which has nothing to do with the Nexus sprint goal. So they are optimizing for their comfort level and their psychological identity as a component team and not for the Nexus sprint goal. Then other Scrum teams get frustrated. What the heck? What are you doing, man? You are adding no value. And it creates all kinds of chaos. So I would say, don't associate your identity with a component. Realize that we will do whatever the heck we need to do to meet the Nexus sprint goal. And then you should not have this problem like my work is not adding value.
Thank you for that, Ravi. Very passionate, but very inspiring as they're coming in. Simon, did you want to add something?
Yeah, it reminds me on a great story I had a couple of years ago working with a Nexus. And I was the Nexus Scrum Master and the Scrum Master of 2 teams at that time. And we had exactly that issue Ravi was pointing out, that some teams were working on a specific part, and if there was nothing to do, then they pulled something very low on the backlog. And we make this transparent in one of the retrospectives. And the brilliant idea they came up with, I never thought about it. They said, why not try to let people move between teams, like an apprenticeship for, like, I go for 2 sprints to another team and somebody's joining me. So they were rotating team members. So they learned about what their other teams are doing. So over time, they learned about what components they're working on, how does this work? And on the long run, so after 1 year, this improved that way that it was more easily for every team to pull some work from the top of the backlog. Look, oftentimes it takes longer, but I guess that's the way that in scaling, we need to think beyond a team identity. That's a really nice point Ravi made.
That was a really good point. And I know that even in terms of entering a scaling environment, how we do self-selection, how we do things like team self-selection, apprenticeship, there's a lot of things out there too that can be, experienced through the class or through some write-ups. So Yuval, you have your hand up, and I would love for you to answer the question, but I would love for you to answer this question more. Now, I think you're going to share some experience. So figure out how to segue into this, because at the high level, we've just been having this discussion. I think this question is great for the listeners. What's the best roadmap to move from a waterfall work frame to the agile to one of agility? And I'm going to add my own thing without putting lipstick on a pig. What is your recommendation there? As you think about that?
So one last thought. I think on the previous question, I'm going to answer another question along the way. So I think Simon's example of cross-training, apprenticeship is one of the best ways to minimize or a good example of how to minimize dependencies. Once you have these people on the, let's call it the billing team, that know how to do some stuff with the shopping cart and vice versa, when the billing team needs something that needs some work in the shopping cart, they don't need to manage that as a dependency. They just do it, to use the Nike framework, right? And that's how we minimize dependencies. We learn about some different things, or we reorganize our nexus, because the goal is the nexus around the right people that need to be together to avoid dependencies across teams. Ideally, a person should be able to do everything, right? That's the best way to manage dependencies. If not, then one Scrum team should be able to do as many things as possible without external dependencies. If not, the Nexus. Going back to your question about how to start, I think that's a big aspect of how to start, to be honest. You need to think about your goals. What are you trying to do here from a business perspective, and looking at, connecting it to what is the company talking to shareholders about? Maybe the company is talking about a digital transformation or whatever buzzword you want to use. And first, figure out, why are we really doing this? And one way to avoid that, term that you didn't want to use, call it agile in name only or scaled agile in name only, is to make it connect to real business need rather than fashion. It shouldn't be about fashion. It should be about, we really have a problem that we're not able to solve with the current way we're doing things. To go back to my example earlier, they didn't know how to solve for having this consumer product company didn't know how to achieve a fast turnaround time on a design that's gonna win in the market with the processes that they were using at the time. Their waterfall processes, they're experts in. World-class experts at how to design a waterfall process that can exist in the complicated space. But if your organization is tackling a complex environment with some volatility, uncertainty, complexity, first come to the realization that that's the environment that you're in. Make it transparent that we need a different approach. Once leaders of the context that you're in, whether it's one team or 500 teams, come to this realization, start to look at the options that you have. Start to look at the different structures that can be useful. Start to look at how would you potentially use them? How would it look like to organize this way, in a way that creates teams that are aligned to the strategy that you're trying to implement? And what are your options for different processes or frameworks that would support you? And that brings us back to the initial conversation about, first you need to choose a framework or some hybrid, or just some set of principles and practices that are based on a mishmash of frameworks that you like. There are obviously risks. The more options you look at, the more you're trying to customize stuff, the harder it is to get this across to people. So there's value in choosing one language, consistent language that you're going to use in your organization. So preferably choose something like that. It includes some, Scrum.org, we know a lot about training, right? So training is part of this. We need to be trained in the models that we're considering. But when I work with organizations as compared to public training, I don't consider these things training. I consider them workshops. And even if you go in and, for example, in a biotech firm I'm working with right now, we started with some observation of how they're working and what are the goals. We've done, Scrum Master and Product Owner, the combo class to get a feeling for, what are we expecting for Scrum Masters and Product Owners and how things might look like and how organizing around value might look like. And then we had a workshop, a couple of days of workshop to kind of digest these concepts and figure out, okay, what are we going to do with this? What are the next steps? What's the experiment that we should start with?
Yeah.
Apply agile, and bottom line is apply agile thinking, empiricism, transparency, inspection, adaptation to how you are approaching agile. Try to minimize the sprint zero of thinking about things and training about things without doing things.
Yeah.
Design one initial sprint and see how it's going.
I was talking to Ken maybe a couple of weeks ago, and like when people think about the processes, for him that was interesting. We were talking about Nexus, EBM, different stuff, and he had said, you know what, if you can't start to think about, if people can't get into the mode of learning and have the right mindset, then the process isn't going to matter. So I thought that was an interesting thing. So Magda, perfect. It's like you guys know when I'm going to ask you a question. So Magda, feel free to add what you'd like there, but I'd really love if you could go deeper into the conversation about some practices you've used to help organizations make dependencies transparent, how you've minimized them. This could be, anything about how have you maybe categorized dependencies, those different things that you might be able to offer as examples.
So thanks for this question. What I would like to, I value really your answer. I would only just add something from my also experience. What I've noticed that people in organizations, also C-level, they tend to think about the agile transformation or scaling frameworks as goals. Maybe you've noticed the same. So be careful with that. They shouldn't be goals. Agile transformation or scaling framework, whatever framework it is, it's not the goal, because when you end up with such a goal, you will be focusing only on mechanical things without the agile mindset, without understanding deeply empiricism and value that you deliver. This is what we want from agility, to quickly adapt to changes, to internal changes, market changes, really experiment. This is what Yuval actually said, so I'm not going to repeat your brilliant answer, but I'm going just to put some open question. Is the transformation your goal? Is the scaling framework your goal? If yes, try to rethink it. That would be my answer. And about minimizing dependencies on the organizational level. So the first, there are of course several things and can be like dependencies rather on the teams level, so Nexus level, or even organizational level. So from one biggest also takeaway from my work, it was creating, like we call it like the Scrum self-sufficient product. That was a large company, 12,000 people, and we managed to create one product, not only Nexus working with Scrum teams inside, but also we managed to reduce dependencies. What sort of dependencies? Not inside Nexus, because this is the first problem. The second issue with external dependencies, especially for product owner, this experience can be valuable. So for example, we have like the marketing team and sales team, and we have the finance team and legal department, because we are signing contracts with both vendors and other B2B companies. So that is also dependency. And when you ask the separate department, so please collaborate with me, please do something for me, from the marketing, for example, campaign, or do something with me in the finance department, or please, we need to sign up this contract. Yes, we can, but you need to wait. You need to wait for our availability. So what happened in this organization? They tried to acquire as much more people as they could and create, for example, very small but private, sort of private marketing department, like a few people, their own call center, their own finance, legal, everything under one product owner, reporting directly to the vice president. So very empowered person. Teams were working. Of course, they were having some dependencies. Inside, of course, that wasn't everything smoothly going and wonderfully. Of course not. There were issues, but they need to be resolved also in the empirical way. That was like the small bubble, like a small company inside a large corporate environment. Very interesting thing, but the rest of the organization, they didn't follow this pattern. However, this product, entire product with those small people, small departments, small teams, when they were together working on the same product, minimizing the also external dependencies, they didn't follow, even though like with the revenue was growing and all business also out there indicators and customers were happy, even though the rest of the organization didn't follow this pattern. So even if you have a success story, the pilot, I'm not trying to discourage you right now, but even though if you have it, still there is no guarantee that the rest of the organization will follow the same. So that was like the external to the Nexus dependencies. So they created the small bubble, the small organization inside the company. But when it comes to teams, inside Nexus, team dependencies, so they may be different, maybe related to technology, right? Dependencies. So what we need to do, and that was what Simon actually said, like maybe a proteins model will help. But the thing is, make those dependencies transparent, manage them, ideally remove them if it's possible. So we can, for example, go with some value stream mappings. There are different tools, but they are helpful and showing us some dependencies. So teams, from my experience, people are doing different things like tables with visualization, with arrows. So there are different practices what we can use. Actually, in the Nexus, that would be for Simon, probably. We have plenty, dozens of practices how to actually manage Nexus, but also for dependencies. And this is about Nexus dependencies. That's a great article that Simon recently wrote. So that also might be helpful for our listeners to just review this article. Yeah, it's available on our resources, Scrum.org.
Yeah, there's maybe we can put when we post this up, what we'll do is we'll post a link to the practices. So a lot of the things when we think about different domains, or if we're looking at dependencies within an organization, organizational, technical, or product perspective, what would you be looking at? So we're rounding up on times, ladies and gentlemen. We have about 7 minutes, but Ravi, I see you have your hand up, so that just means you want to answer the next question, in my opinion. So I'm going to ask you to hold what you had to say. Because there's a couple questions here that are Nexus specific, and I would love for you to share your experience. So this one's about the Nexus integration team. How does it actually work in practice? Is there a stable core of dedicated developers and additional ones from other teams? Is this recreated every sprint? Is this, different set of developers? Is this a full-time job for the developers during a sprint, part-time? Basically, how would you look at this and see the formation and the evolution of the Nexus integration team? And I think a great way to consider this might be about what is the actual service they are bringing back to the Nexus. If you could take that, please.
Yeah, so real world scenario, when I introduced Nexus in a company, I had the VP of director of engineering, I had the product owner in the room, and we had the whole Nexus, all the members of the Nexus physically in the room or remote. And I explained to them what is the accountability or the intent of the Nexus integration team. And I briefly said, look, the goal is we need to have a high value, integrated, high quality done increment by the end of every sprint. And then what I would like you to consider is, based on where we are right now, what are the things that may get in the way of us achieving that goal? And what are the superpowers that must be present in the Nexus integration team to help us overcome those challenges? I don't know the answer. The director of engineering doesn't know the answer. Product owner doesn't know the answer. You know the answer. So we're going to leave the room. When you're done, call us and tell us who will be on your Nexus integration team. And we stepped out, probably gave them like a 10-minute time box. They figured it out in about 5 minutes, called us back in. And that was a real practical experience of bottom-up intelligence, crowdsourced self-management. And from that time onwards, we told them the composition must evolve in alignment with achieving the accountability, and the team managed themselves. I recommend, this is not something that the Nexus Guide prescribes, I recommend to preserve the composition of the NIT at least for one sprint for continuity's sake. And if something unexpected happens, you want to make some changes, then that's fine. So that's something that I recommend. One thing I learned from you, Trish, also, and Ken, was the Nexus integration team should not be misinterpreted as a management structure where project managers, program managers, delivery line managers coalesce to kind of micromanage the team, or external consultants, because the moment the people in the NIT are not from the Nexus, from the Scrum teams, it impedes self-management. So occasionally, perhaps you may need to bring in an external consultant who can teach the team to fish, but that should be, I would recommend that should be few and far between. The best teacher in the world is Google. There are lots of smart people who can figure out something, go to the NIT, learn, teach, then move on. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
We also don't sponsor Google, or nor are we
Oh, yeah.
Google. So thank you for that. I do have, I want to take this, if you could do this very quickly, Simon, because it's about the recent update we made to the Nexus Guide. And the other questions that people have asked us, we see them, Yuval looks like he's answering them all right now, but we can also reach out directly. This one is about the update to the Nexus Guide that we made recently. So we used to have the Nexus Sprint retrospective, and I'm asking you, Simon, because we had a lot of conversation when we made this decision to change it as a community. So when we look at the Nexus retrospective, it used to be in 3 parts. And that's one thing we haven't really talked about today was, the retrospective of how we are working together as a large group. And so what we used to do is say, hey, the Nexus should have, come up with the discussions. The second part is the individual teams. What are we going to do to maybe, address some of those issues that came up? And then we meet again at the end. In the updated Nexus Guide, we removed that. Can you talk about why, what specific reason? And then when you have a new Nexus team, or you're starting with these, how do you deal with those individual sprint retrospectives? Should there be 3 layers? Should there be 2 layers? What are your suggestions there?
Okay.
And
try to make
1 minute.
Okay. We try to make it as quick as possible. So the idea is the Nexus retrospective ideally should preserve bottom-up intelligence and improve the Nexus as a whole. So we need to make that happen. And the 3-way structure of a retrospective is just one format of doing this. There are also a couple of reasons, and I have good experience with doing a different format like an open space. If you have one specific problem and you want to have the intelligence of all the teams and all the people, that's an idea to switch the retrospective format for one sprint or so to enable this. Choose whatever works for you, and also do a retrospective on how to do a retrospective in the future. So you could also improve this. I hope this was in 1 minute.
It was good enough.
Okay.
But the spirit is still there, and that there should be the inspection and adaptation as a Nexus, and within the teams, we don't break Scrum. So
Yep.
With 1 minute to spare, everyone, thank you so much for your questions. I want to let you know that we are having a second Ask a PST on February 17th around the scaling topic again. So bring your questions there. I hope you can take some of this information, that it's been helpful. Thank you, panelists, for not speaking over each other. I hope I didn't speak too much because we've really had so much brilliance to share. So thank you, everyone, and watch out for the next Scaling Ask a PST in February. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.